Raffaello, son of Giovanni Santi, saw the light in Urbino on March the 28th, 1483. It was Good Friday night. Outside through the streets, processions of hooded men were celebrating the Passion of Christ. At home, Magia di Battista Ciarla suffered the pangs of childbirth. Giovanni Santi waited anxiously. The house is still there, at its post, on the rise beside the church of San Francesco, a few steps from the ducal palace. A Madonna with child Bambino, a fresco of vague beauty, is still conserved there, and it is believed that Giovanni Santi portrayed his wife Ciarla with the newborn son Raffaello. Giorgio Vasari dwells on the importance of the domestic hearth.
Because Giovanni knew how important it was to raise children with milk, not from a wet nurse, but from real mothers, when Raffaello was born, he wanted the real mother to suckle him, and paternal customs appeared more ardent in tender years.
From the generosity of the maternal breast, Raffaello later drew upon the idea of a florid and joyful femininity proper to his art. He was born in the season favourable to local painters, who produced areas of landscapes and limpid skies in their paintings. The Montefeltro, in spring, a triumph of brilliant colours, vegetation of infinite shades of green that fade into the azure mountains on the horizon. The sparkle of nature opens out onto an agglomeration of towers, rounded arches, columns, ochre brick, and white stone. Urbino dominated over the surrounding inaccessible heights. Its palace, fabulous and imposing, was linked to one man, Duke Federico of Montefeltro, who died a few months before the birth of Raffaello. The palace had transformed the entire city into a court, a refined court, fashionable. Talented men, artists, architects, and scholars orbited around the patronage of Federico, leaving tangible traces of their passage through Urbino. Giovanni Santi was deeply inserted into this cultural climate, open to innovation. The Cronaca Rimata, the rhyming chronicle, a work in verses that consigned the anecdotes, personalities, and conception of its time to history, wrote leaving a portrait of the environment in which Raffaello grew up and the spiritual dowry that his native land gave him. The works of the major exponents of Flemish painting had joined Federico's refined court. Bright, naturalistic work characterised by a refined attention to detail. The most celebrated portrays by Sanzio vivid and true, the reflexive magic of the jewels and the tactile restitution of the materials later owed a debt to Flemish taste. But in Urbino, in the years of his youth, a current just as updated yet opposed developed. The presence of men such as Luciano Laurana, Piero della Francesca, Leon Battista Alberti, and Francesco di Giorgio Martini made Urbino itself an ideal city, where the so-called mathematical Renaissance flourished, sustaining the divine character of proportion and the mathematical origin of beauty. Coming from the Urbino Renaissance culture, led Raffaello to conceive beauty as an order of geometrical and musical relations. A famous case is the magnificent round temple of the Marriage of the Virgin created for Città di Castello. The painter wrote his name on the frieze of the temple and his origin from Urbino, claiming his cultural roots proudly, aware of the value of his work. Raffaello's father, Giovanni Santi, was a humanist, a courtier, but above all a painter. He received important orders from the Dukes of Urbino and often worked outside the city. He was in Gradara, Fano, Frontino, and Cagli, where he left his masterpiece, the frescoes of the Tirani chapel in the church of San Domenico. His workshop, the most flourishing in the city, stood beside the family home. Little Raffaello took his first steps in this microcosm filled with colours and gold plating. He lived with the slow birth of images. He saw his father hesitate with the pencil over a draping or the crease in a lip. An arcaded courtyard separated the home from the workplace. The stone upon which the colours were prepared is still conserved in the arcade. The children who worked in the workshop took care of it. Little Raffaello was not allowed to behave like the other boys, not just because he was the son of the maestro, but also because he showed an unusual talent right from the start. While the other children lacked colour pigments, Raffaello approached painting by learning the art of drawing from his father. Halfway through the 16th century, Giorgio Vasari suggested an apprenticeship for Raffaello, only 8 years old, with Perugino. Other scholars hypothesize his entry into Perugino's workshop at 11 years old, at the death of his father. More recent critical analysis concentrates on his apprenticeship in his father's workshop, establishing an encounter with Perugino later in life. Giovanni Santi made his last journey, the most distant, in 1493. He was invited by Duchess Elisabetta Gonzaga of Urbino to Mantua, where he was to portray Dukes Ludovico and Isabella. These portraits were never finished because the maestro fell ill and died a year later in Urbino. The young prodigy was left an orphan at only 11 years old. Raffaello inherited his father's workshop and ran it with the help of the painter Evangelista da Piandimeleto. He remained stably in Urbino until at least 1500. His first certain work is the Trionfo di San Nicola da Tolentino, Triumph of San Nicola of Tolentino, an altarpiece commissioned by Andrea Baronci of Città di Castello. Raffaello made a contract for this altarpiece with his partner Evangelista. He was 17 years old and was cited as magister, maestro. The boy was fully able to perform the role of inventor and painter. The drawings prepared for the Città di Castello altarpiece reveal the light-heartedness of the adolescent and his genius. At the same time, the technique, the colours and the pose of the figures evoke the art of Giovanni Santi and make the work a product of the workshop where Raffaello grew up and was the maestro. From that moment on the threshold of the 16th century, Raffaello's career developed rapidly, from Umbria to Tuscany, from Florence to Rome. But Urbino was not forgotten. Reminders lived in the scenarios of several paintings, with the gullies and brilliant greens of the Montefeltro vegetation, with the azure Apennines on the horizon. Raphael Urbinas, i.e. Raffaello of Urbino. This is how the painter signed himself, nostalgic and proud of his native city. The study and imitation of the greatest maestri of the time, such as Perugino, Pinturicchio, Leonardo and Michelangelo, led Raffaello to an original and eclectic poetic that earned him fame as a divine, non-human painter. The education that Raffaello had received from his father had shaped him into an amiable creature, allowing him access later to high-level courts. Vasari wrote,
Raffaello made all the rarest virtues of the soul shine clearly, accompanied with such grace, study, beauty, modesty, and excellent customs. He was handsome and refined, apart from great ability.
Grace, modesty, refinement, gifts that derived from his Urbino training, the same that his friend Baldassare Castiglione requested in the idea of the perfect courtier in the pages of his famous book set in the Urbino court. Raffaello loved beauty and love. A life fired with passion, consumed swiftly, and closed on the same day he was born, Good Friday 1520, at only 36 years old.